Hello, everyone. I'm Siddharth Pandey, and I'm a writer, academic, and artist from Shimla, currently based in Delhi NCR. I've been writing for the Tribune for the past 1 year now, and my latest article is an interview with Robert Macfarlane, the preeminent writer on nature and landscape of our times. And I'm incredibly honored and pleased that he is joining us from Cambridge, where he teaches English literature and environmental humanities. Robert's works are very well known across the world for their complex and subtle navigation of the relationship that the myriad relationships that exist between humans and landscape. And today we'll be talking specifically about Is a River Alive, his most recent magnum opus that has released this month itself, but also about other works and general questions regarding nature writing. Before I bring Robert on board, I have to tell you a little anecdote. I have known Robert since more than a decade now, and I came to know about him in 2013 when I was an MPhil student at the University of Cambridge and then a PhD student. And at that time, I wasn't aware that he was teaching in the same university, and it was January 2013. And I found myself in a local bookshop to buy a present for my younger brother, who was also there along with me at the same university. And his birthday fell in January itself. And I chanced upon Robert's first book, which is called Mountains of the Mind, A History of a Fascination. And just the mere title fascinated me, like the title itself. And I picked it up, and I knew that this is going to be the best book for my book present for my brother, because both of us come from the Himalayas. And Robert's works have been incredibly influential in my own understanding of my mountains and landscape and culture. So I got the book, and I think I have never done this with any other present, but I presented the book to my brother with one hand and took it right then back from that. I said to him that I know that this is your birthday present, but I have to read it first because I couldn't basically control myself there. And so that's the huge pull that Robert's works have had on me. And I'm very honored to call him a great friend, a mentor, also my PhD examiner. And it's been absolutely lovely to discuss so many things under the sun, especially nature and landscape and the Himalayas and mountains from all over the planet over the past many years. And it's a great delight and privilege for the Tribune as well to be interviewing him. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you, dear Sid. What a beautiful and typically generous, charismatic introduction. I thank you, and I thank the Tribune for having me, and to the people listening, thank you for joining this conversation.
Thank you, Robert. Many congratulations on the book release as well. I know that you are very, very busy with the book tours, and also you finding time for this interview is really highly appreciated. So let's start with the first question, which would be just a general question on the category called nature writing, a term that you don't quite like, but generally so it's called nature writing, or as you prefer to say, writings on landscape and place. So I just wanted to understand, and for our readers who might be coming to this category for the first time, what nature writing entails, why you don't like this term, and if you have an alternate term for that. And where does your work fit in this whole, in this whole sphere genre?
Well, the first thing to say is that India is enjoying an extraordinary surge in energy of writing about nature and place and people at the moment. And it's a really exciting time, I think, in as it were, the contemporary history of Indian literature and writing. And I would mention here Yuvan Aves, whose recent intertidal has made waves, rightly so, is an absolutely extraordinary book. I'd mention Arati Kumar Rao, whose Margin Lands is spectacular. Neha Sinha's Wild and Willful, and I would also mention your own work, Sid, the forthcoming book on Shimla, and also Fossil, which is a different form, the long poem with which you have grappled with the sort of deep time relationship between humans and and mountains in a region you know so well. So something really exciting is happening in India at the moment, and it's political. It's and what it's doing, I think, is what nature writing should do,
Mm,
which is to interrogate, examine, illuminate this utterly vital relationship between
mm,
humans, landscape, and what might be called the more than human world, the creatures and plants and other species and other presences, with whom, and I would say with whom and not with which, we share this world, this fragile and miraculous world. Why don't I like the term nature writing? I mean, the thing I always say is that we can call it nature writing as long as that doesn't confine and restrict it to a sort of prettified or kitchified notion of a reduced notion of nature. Nature is, as Raymond Williams says, the most complex word in the English language, and so it holds shadow as well as light within itself. It holds humanly made matter as well as creaturely life within it. So if that's what we mean by nature, everything, then we might as well call it writing rather than nature writing. So I think in some sense it's a tautology.
mm,
Yeah. So as to where my own writing fits into all of this, I suppose I have always I've been my first book, Mountains of the Mind, was published 22 years ago, and was the beginnings of an attempt. I mean, the question that animated that one was how, how and why do we fall in love with mountains, which are rock and ice?
yeah.
And there's a cultural answer to that. There's also an aesthetic. I mean, those two are not separable. And then every book has had a question, I guess, at its heart, and the question at the heart of Is a River Alive is the one of the title.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, and so you mentioned it is a river alive, and that's your latest work. I think your 10th or 11th work. I mean, I always lose count of it.
I
And
think I've lost counts. Well, maybe 11. Yeah, something like
yes, yes.
that.
Congratulations on that. And because that's the book that's in focus. So, Is a River Alive is about rights of nature, and in which you make these beautiful, stunning, quite terrifying as well, three journeys to different continents. And then the fourth journey is in your own backyard in Cambridge, where
Mm.
you think about rivers and their animacy, but then that question becomes much broader and it flowers into a larger question on the animacy of nature itself. And
Mm.
you have this beautiful line somewhere in the beginning itself that we may never think like a river, but we can always think along with them.
Mm.
And then you go on to say that rivers are very much your co-authors of this book.
Mm.
So in what ways, I would like to understand, do rivers become co-authors? And in what ways did you start exploring this question of animacy and aliveness of nature? And why was it so
Yes.
important? This very question itself. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there are a few more important questions, it would seem to me, than what we decide is alive and what we decide is dead. What power, state power, financial power, corporate power decides is alive and decides is dead. Really, so many consequences flow from where that border
Mm,
between life and not life, between animacy and matter, something like this is drawn. And it's a constantly shifting boundary. It's a highly political and in many ways highly policed boundary. And I have, I mean, we are living at a time in which, in America, for example, there is a war on life as it is lived in and by land and water. Really, I think the Trump administration is committed to the assetization of everything, we could say, the fiscalization of everything, and those forms of relationship with the living world, with rivers, with land, which perceive a reciprocal, at times sacred life in that land, in that water, are being suppressed, marginalized, disenfranchised. So, in an odd way, this oldest of questions, what is alive and what is dead, is always a live question.
yes.
So yes, I wanted to use rivers to think with about that vast metaphysical, as it were, ontological question, a question about the nature of being. And then, of course, rivers, in their wonderful ways, came to immerse and absorb and fascinate me. As you
Exactly.
say, the river that rises as a spring near my home here on the 99 million year old chalk of Cambridge, the river, the Rio Los Cedros in Ecuador,
Yeah.
Chennai, which I know we're going to come on to and talk about the three rivers of Chennai, the water of
Yes.
the watery city of Chennai, and then finally the Muteshakau Shipu, which is the Innu name for this vast wild river, whose
Exactly.
name translates into English as the river who flows between square blocky cliffs, and that's up in northeastern Canada.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Absolutely. So, and was there a particular reason that you chose these three regions? Because you also use these three regions and then, of course, Cambridge to navigate the other important question, which is, of course, related to the question of animism, which is to do with the rights of nature. That becomes your sort of central one of the pegs on which the whole narrative rests. So, yeah,
Yes. Well, I think we could say that in all four places, attempts are being made to, as I put it, imagine rivers otherwise, imagine water otherwise. And by otherwise, I mean other to the purely instrumental account of rivers as resources,
yeah,
not as life forces, as service providers. So this deterritorialized account of the river as merely that which provides drinking water and that which removes our
yeah,
waste.
exactly.
And rivers do all of that for us, and it's very important that they do all of that for us. But of course, it is not their only form of meaning or being in the world. They are also, as we know, as you know, lifelines, memory keepers, storytellers. They flow through people as surely as they flow through places. So, in each of these four places, including my own home city of Cambridge, where every midsummer eve the rights of the River Cam are read on the banks of our sickened river, the right to flow, the right to be free from pollution. It is almost as though by saying it we might make it so, but sadly that isn't the case. But I do believe that the dream of
Yeah,
telling a new old story about rivers, which is of them as alive,
yeah,
of our fate as flowing with theirs, feels like the work of writing, of song,
exactly.
and yeah, and then in Ecuador, in India, and in Nitassinan and Quebec, again, powerful ways of reimagining water are underway, and we can talk a little about some of those.
Exactly, absolutely. I mean, this idea of reading the rights of river back to the river itself
The river here.
uh, and we'll be coming to the craft of your writing later on, but it's something which I know that you also do once your manuscript is is done, and in the final go, you go
Speak it aloud.
and you sort of
Yeah.
know the whole thing. And I know that's more from the point of view of craft and revisions and
Mhm.
all, but there's also
Yeah.
some sort of a reciprocity,
Incantatory.
yes, that is there, right, in the act of just reading out your work to
Yes.
non-human entity,
Yes.
right?
I think that's right. And a sort of speaking aloud, yeah. And in fact, thinking about reciprocity, just before we began speaking, Sid, my father sent through some photographs. He had taken a copy of Is a River Alive up to this beautiful, clear watered stream in the mountains of the Northwest Lake District where he lives. And then he had dived deep underwater with it and had taken these incredible photographs of it being itself rivered with this amazing play of light and water.
Oh,
So if that is another kind of reciprocity, the rivering of the
oh,
river book.
it very much is, and I just want to tell the viewers here that his father, John Macfarlane, is just among the finest photographers of landscape anywhere currently. So please do follow him on Instagram if you don't.
Okay. Okay.
Regarding your journeys, we could go on and talk about each and every journey, but clearly, I'm very interested in India. This is the first
Yes.
time that you are coming to India to research your book. I really want to ask you what took you so long to come to.
Oh, well, quite right. Quite right.
It's you have a beautiful. It's literally the heart of the book because it's a middle chapter of the book where you come to Chennai. to see its rivers, to immerse yourself within the natural landscape, and you have wonderful people guiding you throughout. So, what's that relationship been like in terms of the whole book, but also in terms of you being introduced to South Asia, India for the first time? Yeah.
Well, yes, it is the heart. It is the heart of the book structurally, and in many ways, it's the heart of the book emotionally. I think it's probably the region where I felt the highest highs and at some level the lowest lows as well. There, sections of those three rivers, Kosastalaya, the Kuum, and the Adyar, which are at times as close to biologically lifeless as any river I've met. Yuvan Aves, who was mentioned earlier, and who was my friend, my guide, our friend, to the rivers and indeed the marsh and the groundwater and the yeris of that region, because water doesn't just take the form of river anywhere, but certainly not in Chennai. Uh, he's always keen, and rightly so, to point out that life does return to these rivers, particularly when the monsoon flushes them and they sort of suddenly breathe again and the fresh water comes down. But of course, as we know, they also return monstrously when the cyclone strikes. And rivers have memories; they remember their old courses. And so the chapter on Chennai, in Chennai, is called Ghosts, Monsters, and Angels. And the ghosts are the rivers that have been suppressed and forgotten and have almost vanished from the landscape and from the memory of this watery city. And then the monsters are the forms that that water takes when it returns, sometimes fatally, when the cyclones strike. And then the angels are Yuvan and his friends and colleagues and others who are working to reimagine a just water future for Chennai that includes humans, particularly those who have little voice now, fisher folk, for example, more than humans, the creatures and birds and who thrive in and around healthy water but are struggling to live in
Yeah.
water that is dying, and and the community of the city itself. So it was,
Mhm.
yeah, and it ends. The chapter ends, and my time there really ended on turtle patrol because I was there in the nesting period for olive ridley sea turtles, and again that dialectic between hope and despair, between death and between life. We saw so many corpses of mother turtles washed up following trawler strikes, but we also saw the first hatchlings of the year, and we collected hundreds of turtle eggs in overnight and reburied them safely in the hatchery. So it was absorbing, immersive, fascinating. What took me so long? I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I mean, clearly your time was very well spent, and it must have been extremely revelatory. All the two
Was.
that you spent here. Just wanted to tell my viewers and readers again here that Robert and Yuvan have also written a ghazal in praise of the olive ridley turtles, and they're there right online, available freely for you to listen.
Yes, it can be. It's also been set beautifully to music and by Lydia Samuel and sung by Hal. So if you search for Night Swimmer Sea Turtle, you'll be able to hear the ghazal sung, yeah, by nine voices.
It's brilliant and quite haunting as well.
Mm.
And even, I mean, going back to this very answer, even as we are speaking, India and Pakistan are at the brink of a war. And one of the things that India did in retaliation to the terrible terrorist attack a couple of days ago was to suspend the Indus Valley, the Indus
Yeah.
River Treaty. So rivers are clearly, I mean, you would not find a more political example than this from the recent times, right? To suspend the water.
Exactly.
So, yes. And speaking of Yuvan and your other companions in your other journeys across the book, conviviality and camaraderie and friendship play a very important role in all of your works. And even though your earlier works did have long sections where you are going out alone, one of the very first sections I remember reading from Wild Places, your second book,
Mm.
is where you are again at the shore of a river, and at a place where the river is emptying itself into the sea, and you take a
Mm.
dive there, and you beautifully sort of describe the two currents of water that you can feel around
Yeah,
you, and it's a description that still stays in my mind and haunts me. But over a period of time and over the course of your books as they have evolved,
Mm.
there are many people that come in and populate your right,
Yeah,
which seem to be going in a, for me it's very radical, because a lot of criticism regarding nature writing focuses on this sort of one person going out and it sort of evokes
Mm.
colonial era metaphors. I'm not
Mm.
exactly I don't exactly entirely agree with those criticisms, but there is clearly a certain certain point that is being made there.
Yeah, yeah,
um, and so, and you also say somewhere, I think at the in the towards the end of the book, that expeditions are temporary families but tight knit. That's one of
oh
the
yeah,
phrases you make
yeah,
in the Quebec chapter, I
mm.
think. Yeah.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
this sense of conviviality, friendship, how does this
Mm.
coming, and kinship, because kinship is at the heart of your narrative as well. Kinship not only with
Yeah.
people, but with non-humans, but also with people. So how is kinship and friend? How do kinship and friendship open up the landscapes
Oh.
that you are navigating and traveling in? I guess a much more fertile and fecund way than if you were only going there
Mm.
alone. Um,
Well, it's a beautifully phrased thought and question. It makes me think immediately of a line of Robin Wall Kimmerer's. She's writing about moss, but
ah,
as ever, when she's writing about moss, she's also writing about people. And
yeah.
she says water is held best not by an individual but by a community. Talking
Mm,
about moss's absorbency,
mm,
and I also think that a river, of course, is something that we singularize
mm.
as river, but really a river is a gathering. The best definition I've been able to come up with over 5 years of thinking very hard about rivers is a river is a gathering that seeks the sea. And I think a book is a gathering that seeks a reader. And rivers, like books, have watersheds. They drain from many sources. Many tributaries converge to create the flow. And that is absolutely true of this book. A conviviality of companions was utterly central to it. I mean, I couldn't have written the book without the rivers. I couldn't have written it sitting still or from an archive or from a library, but I absolutely couldn't have written it without Yuvan, Juliana Furci, the Chilean mycologist at the heart of the first section, Cosmo Sheldrake, this extraordinary listener, and then Rita Mestacosho, the Innu poet and community leader, and Wayne Chambliss, my American highly kind of uh, what would it be, sort of contrarian intellect who is always testing every idea as hard as he can. So I thought with those people, I wrote with those places, and the result is I hope a polyphonic book in which many voices get to speak through and around one another. It's not all contained within my my voice.
Yes, yes, and they then, so each of these individuals themselves are polyphonic. To be honest, I mean, reading about Wayne Chambliss, I had to just stop and see what are you describing as a person. It's just a fascinating individual. I have hardly ever come across. He just seems to be quite not from the world, but from a fictitious
A
fantasy
myth.
science
I
fiction
know,
kind
but
of.
he exists.
But he
And
exists.
all I did was write him down. I mean, that's the wonder of writing about people is when you find the extraordinary ones, all you have to do is write them down.
But now coming to the writing part of it, I think I really want to talk a bit about the craft of writing and the idea of spontaneity and aliveness. Clearly, aliveness
Ah,
is the theme you keep coming back to, but as a young writer myself, and as someone who's sort of constantly looking out for different kinds of writings and what they might teach me, one of the most remarkable things about your work, right from the very first book that I picked up in 2013, was this robust physicality that you bring to each and every description. Every line is sheer poetry, lyrical, but also something which has a deep, intense physicality about it, as if almost you want to describe and show it to the people. Interestingly, I think in this book that I completed reading just a couple of days ago, whereas so almost all the you are fantastic with just writing sentences of not more than 4 to 5 words each, but in this book, especially in the final section, there are, I think, 3 paragraphs which run almost over a page, almost
Yes.
as if you're trying to imitate the flow and craziness and the madness of the river that you are navigating. So, and they sort of just progressively increase in size, literally. And I
Yep.
was looking for where would the full stop come, and it just didn't come. And which is brilliant as a sort of an experimental creative exercise. So this one of the things, therefore, that I think, as a from purely writerly and craft point of, how do you steer this dialectic between describing spontaneity or the aliveness of nature, but then also chiseling it and honing it? And this brings to my
Mm.
mind a famous quote by William Wordsworth, when he said that poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful emotions. You yourself have been hailed as a poet in prose, and but then he also adds an addendum, recollected in periods of tranquility, and that's
Mm.
something that people often miss out. So what is often quoted is just the spontaneity part, but not the
Yeah.
moment of tranquility part. And I think it's the moment of tranquility part is something which attests to the need of sitting with yourself and honing and chiseling the things that you have observed,
Mm.
firsthand. So just wanted to speak on this relationship between spontaneity and craft.
Very interesting. Well, I mean, I know as an academic as well as a scholar and a writer, you yourself have, and a reader, you yourself have thought very hard about language's relationship to aliveness, to forms of vitality and vibrancy. And I mean, it seems almost self-evident to say, but language has an astonishing enlivening power.
Yeah.
We have all, those of us who've read novels, have all great novels have all fallen in love with characters who never existed. We have grieved for characters who never lived and never died, but
Mm,
we feel it truly in our hearts. And so the medium itself has not just a vivifying power or a resurrecting power, but an utterly
mm,
creative power ex nihilo. So it's an amazing resource. That's the silliness, is saying that language is a wonderful resource to a writer. But in the case of a book like this, where really the philosophical wager is an attempt to convince a skeptical reader, let us say, that water is alive in fundamental and consequential ways. And
mm,
really, to do that, you have to redefine what life is.
yeah.
And so I knew that I was going to need to draw as much as I could on language's
Mm,
vitalizing powers, and but also over the course of this period of writing, my own sense of self became rivered. It really did, and the long paragraphs you mentioned, or the
mm,
long flows, they all come in the final sort of 30 pages or so of the book, and that's at once the most metaphysically and hydrologically turbulent phase of the book, but it's also the phase at which, by that point, so many years of meeting
mm.
rivers and river people, thinking with and about rivers, have all started to kind of wear away the usual conventions and norms. So, yeah, basically, full stops leave the building. I did wonder about, because the book has two endings,
Yes,
which
yes, certainly.
and I thought I'd finished the book and
Mm,
with this phrase, "I am rivered," and then I havered over whether to put a full stop in or not. Anyway, there is one, um, but then anyway, then an epilogue came along. But very briefly, the craft. Whenever I'm asked by younger writers, what's the one piece of advice you have? It is always the very prosaic advice I give now is turn up for work, by
mm.
which I mean sit yourself down in front of your writing and work it.
Yeah.
It'll take hours, it'll take days, it'll take years, but that's how you learn that's how you learn languages rhythms. It's sub-propositional and super propositional powers. You learn to hear it and feel it on the tongue differently,
Yeah,
but only by working it as a medium, as a material.
exactly.
Do you learn that? And that is craft.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it reminds me of James Baldwin's famous quote that talent is overrated. What matters ultimately are the old-fashioned values of discipline and commitment and turning up for work. Exactly what you are trying to say. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that's good. Well, James Baldwin put it much better than I did. So.
Not at all. I think time is running out, but just two sort of last questions. I'll put one. So, continuing from this thing, the last question is sort of the previous question, which is that it seems to me that there are a couple of dialectics or binaries that keep reappearing in your work, from beauty and terror constantly playing together when you're observing nature, or courage. I do not know where you bring the courage from, but courage and fear constantly, sort of bouncing off each other. You talk a lot about fear and pain, and yet clearly it requires courage to enter these kind of landscapes, especially the final landscape of the river in Quebec, right? I remember from one of the previous works as well, you said once that for you, mystery and acknowledging the mystery of nature and acknowledging it in a precise fashion aren't opposites or antithetical to each other, that mystery and precision can go hand in hand. And finally, the dialectic of course, aliveness and death. You you think about your own death at the very end, which is partly haunting as well, and that's how the book sort of concludes. So these sort of contradictions. I mean, one of the things I've always, I think, I've been, I have found personally over my journey as a literature scholar is this, that we don't talk enough about contradictions and binaries in a sort of a dialectical manner. We are too, especially from an ideological point of view, we find it difficult to acknowledge the importance of contradictions, which are right there from our present, systems, family, friends, everywhere, to nature, of course, right? So, would you say that contradictions play and the acknowledgement of these kind of contradictions and binaries play an important role in your writing, in your
Yeah, fascinating thought, and I absolutely agree with you that there's a profound difference, category difference between the binary and the dialectic, and too often we cast as binary what is in fact dialectic, and I would say, to return to India and to return to Yuvan here, he is one of the most subtle thinkers I know about the undoing of binaries and the recognition of the complexity of dialectic, and he does so much of that thinking in the intertidal
yes,
zone where water meets land, where river flows into ocean, salt mingles with fresh, sand, humans, all of this life that thrives in the ecotone between
yes,
water and land, sea, and of course between life and death. And Yuvan has carried the ashes of several of members of his family on that short but very long walk from the crematorium to the ocean to cast their ashes there. So, Yuvan is one of the great undoers of binaries, and one of the great dialectical thinkers I know. And his writing finds ways to bend and fold around itself precisely in order to mimic in its flows, its opposition to the binary.
exactly. No, thank you. And I'll always remain very grateful for you in having introduced me to him. I
The
think
friendship that's
we
flourishing.
thank you. And the final question would just be on diversity, I think, which is one of the
Mm,
most political things you say, that nature doesn't speak in one tongue.
mm,
Diversity is the language of nature. But I think it's when I look at you and your whole overall of creative products, whether from not only writing but also your collaborations with filmmakers, poets, sculptors, painters, uh,
mm.
everyone basically. It just seems that diversity is also something that characterizes your whole oeuvre and your personality as well, which is something I from whatever limited experience I have of the literary world, it's not something that common that you end up, collaborating or thinking in these sort of diverse ways, because all of these, I mean, there are clearly a lot of synergies, but between different forms of arts, but it's also not, I mean, it also requires effort, just like writing
Yeah,
requires effort.
yeah.
Would you would you have some sort of a suggestion or advice as to, if someone is looking forward to get on this path where he or she is not only committed to, say, one art, but
Mm.
trying to think through different forms of art, how might they go ahead with that, with this?
Oh yeah, well, it's something you do. Of course, you move across photography, different forms of prose and music yourself, and yeah, I absolutely thrive on collaboration. And the last decade, in particular, has seen me, and it's part of the shift towards the convivial, towards company. I think moving. I mean, this book is a single authored book on the cover, but as I say, many rivers and many people flow through its pages. But I think with each form and expert in that form with whom I collaborate, I learn something else about language. So even though they are working in paint or in image or in movement, I learn something about language from each of them, and I think they have vicariously lent that learning to me for this book. I think it has much of the collaboration that I have enjoyed has actually nourished aspects of this book. But in terms of advice, I would say find someone who you like and
Yes,
who is really good at something that you are not very good at.
yes,
Another form, another instrument, another art, another skill, and
absolutely.
then just settle with them, speak with them, see what you can make, because your words, if that's your medium, will meet their art, their skill at an unexpected vertex, and that can spark surprise and wonder.
That's a beautiful note. Thank you, Robert Macfarlane, for your time. It's a great
Thank you, Sid.
pleasure and
Thank you.
privilege, and I'm so happy that we could make this happen. Thank you.
Absolute joy of a conversation. So thank you, Sid. Thank you to the Tribune. Thank you to all who've listened.